Hi everyone, I'm Deirdre Breakenridge, Chief Communications Officer at Pure Performance Communications. Welcome to the Nasdaq PR Influencer Series. We are live at Market Site in Times Square, New York City, and joining me for a special panel discussion are three guests. We're going to be talking about spotting PR trends. I have with me Rebekah Iliff. She's Chief Strategy Officer at AirPR, Shonali Burke, who is CEO of Shonali Burke Consulting, and we also have Shannon Furey of M Studio. Welcome.
Thanks, Deirdre.
Thanks, Deirdre. So nice to have you in studio today. So before we get to the spotting trends, and we're going to talk about challenges and changes in PR and communications, let's talk about what actually got you into public relations today. So why did you get into PR, Rebekah?
That's a great question. I think it's one that people ask me all the time, and I actually fell into it. It wasn't something I studied in school or really even was on my radar. I mean, I grew up in the middle of Kansas, and you don't do PR in a place like that. You know, you don't even know what that means. And so I was always a pretty good writer, and I was good at relationships and relationship building. So for me, it started really more on the marketing and communications side, and then eventually, just through relationship building, went on the PR side. But yeah, it's really been, for me, always a mix of marketing, communications, public relations, and just in general relationship building, which is really what a lot of it entails. And writing. I mean, that's a big part of it that I think a lot of people don't realize, how to story tell and how to communicate something in a way that people can digest and understand.
I agree. Writing is a huge part of it. And Shonali, how about you?
So it's funny because similar to Rebekah, I have no training in PR. I went to school to do economics, and then I became an actress, and so my master's in theater. And I had never, ever thought I'd go into PR, but I found that because of my theater skills, which really are about communication, because theater is about accepting people, getting people to accept that they have to suspend their disbelief for whatever time period it is, and that they're going to believe that performance or that show or that movie or whatever it is. And so because of that, people knew who I was, and they said, hey, do you want to do some PR for us? I was like, sure. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'll try it. And that's how I got started. And I started working with an agency in India. I did some freelance work for them, and once I moved to the States, that was it.
Getting people to believe.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Trust.
I've heard that before.
Yes, and believe. That's really interesting.
And I think, like Rebekah said, again, it's about if you know how to tell a story, that is what's really important. I don't think a lot of folks in our industry understand the nuances of that. And I know we're going to get into all of that, but I think that's really at the heart of it, doing it in a way that is compelling enough to get people to suspend their disbelief.
Exactly.
Actually trust you.
Interesting. Shannon, how about you?
Well, similarly, I got into PR by accident. I never knew what I wanted to do growing up. I just didn't know where I was going to fall into work and industry, and I knew I was always a hard worker. If you gave me something to do, I'd do it and go the extra mile to get it done. I was always a good writer, and I always considered myself a good communicator. So when I got into college, I still was kind of like, I don't know what I want to major in. I don't know what I want to do. So I ended up majoring in journalism and mass communications. And still, once I graduated, I was kind of like, all right, well, do I want to be a journalist? Do I want to work in broadcast? And I ended up moving to Phoenix, Arizona, out of the blue. I'm from the East Coast originally. And I got a job in the PR department of a marketing agency out there. No experience. The journalism and writing background helped. And I fell into it that way, and I loved it more than anything I had ever done previously. I love the combination of creativity and business, and I found out that was kind of what I had been searching for through my adolescence and wasn't able to find it, and I found it in PR.
That's great.
Yeah.
It's funny because the way that we all started and got into the industry, things have clearly changed, and I'm wondering if it changed how you feel. But maybe we could just talk a little bit about how the changes in PR have affected you and your businesses. So, want to jump in?
Pick it off, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the interesting thing from my vantage point is that I started in PR and marketing and then jumped to the tech side. So I'm actually, as you know, in PR technology with AirPR. So I took the skills I learned as a PR professional and moved into the technology side to try to innovate, to pull the industry into a really technology-based and data-based industry. So for me, that was the biggest change. Was I could see, we're not going to get anywhere if we don't have analytics and data and proof of all of the activity that we're doing. What is it leading to? What is it doing for the business? So that's been the biggest change over the last really 8 to 10 years. Is while all of these technology tools have seemingly made our job easier, it's also made it really difficult because there's so much noise. So I think from my perspective, that's the biggest change I've seen, is now communicators are required to have some sort of data or technology to help drive the decision making.
So being in tech is fast track when you're doing PR. There's no doubt about it, because I always felt that industry, tech, sort of was leading the way, where there are other industries, especially if you were in PR, were a little bit slower. But Shonali, how about you in terms of change?
I think that is probably the biggest change that I've seen as well, is that now I see people saying we have to learn how to justify our work. We have clients saying, what happened? Mm-hmm. Like, you're not getting hits, and we're not happy. Like, what are we paying you for? And I literally hear those words. Mm-hmm. And this is why people need to understand that PR is not just about hits and impressions, and it is really about formulating strategies to use technologies and to use communications in a way to build relationships that does build trust and that does generate more interest in your product or your service or your business or whatever it is. And that is a high art form. I mean, frankly, PR is sales, which is a high art form because it's demanding. But you're working towards a very specific end. And so no wonder if folks are only pitching, and they're pitching the same old reporters and the same old bloggers all the time, and in any kind of climate, pitching is hard, but especially in the world we're living in today, there's a lot of other stuff going on that is taking away people's attention.
Yeah, the other thing to jump in on that is what we've seen with our data is the narrative being owned by the brand, and so technology has driven that in a sense, and it's really freeing and liberating because you now have more control than you used to, but it also requires you to build a department that you didn't have before, or to have storytellers in-house that you didn't have before, and that's technology combined with, I think, owning the narrative and owned media is likely the biggest shift, and will continue to be over the next 3 to 5 years probably.
I agree. And Shannon, I feel also, and tell me what you think, I feel also the fact that, social has just kind of become the way we live now. And thanks to technology, social is what brings us together. It's what's allowing us to do this right now.
Right.
And that is, again, about connecting and making those connections. And so you can have a great brand narrative and you can have a lot of technology, but if you're not actually focusing on what makes your community tick and kind of being part of that community, not just asking them to be part of yours, you're not really going to be successful in today's space.
Well, it is all about the community. And Shannon, you want to weigh in?
I absolutely agree. I was having this discussion with a colleague the other day, and we were talking about the role of PR and owned content and how social fits in, and we were discussing that we're shifting more to being communicators who, one of the avenues that we use to communicate and connect with our audiences is PR, but then we also have the storytelling, the owned content, the digital analysis that we can use to drive strategy. And so we're really shifting and scaling to various amplification platforms for storytelling. And the PR in the traditional sense is one avenue in which we do that, but we need that skill diversification to really make the impact that our clients are looking for.
We think about that too in terms of, we call it PR engineering. And it's like you have to have.
I love that. That's
you
great
have to
title.
have
You
the
PR engineers.
Yeah, and it's continuous. So you develop a message, you push it out to own media, you see what works, you then amplify it with storytellers like journalists and bloggers. Then you measure the impact, and then refine the message. And it goes like this. It's no longer a linear process. So you have to have the PR communication side, you have to have the data. And it doesn't mean that every PR person has to be a data scientist or an analyst. It just means you have to somehow figure out how to have both of those components to be successful. Or you can just keep throwing events and pitching journalists and doing the things that we've been doing for 25 years and with no results. I mean, there's like two choices. You either move forward or you stay stuck. And we're trying to like get people to come into the 21st century kicking and screaming.
So you
sometimes
there's a lot of kicking and screaming, but that just says that with change are the challenges, and you've sort of pointed out the challenges. So with that, what do you want to say to PR professionals, whether it's come into the 21st century, or Shonali, you talked about trying to kind of get out there above the clutter when, media and bloggers, it's hard to get your story through. So what are you going to tell PR professionals?
Where's the camera?
I think it's on you right now.
Stop spamming journalists. Stop sending press releases to 500 people thinking you're going to get a result. It doesn't work. It just doesn't work. So stop doing that. That's my number one thing.
Don't lie. Just don't lie.
Now there's a thing. That's number one.
PR is not spin, and it's not right to call it spin. General, of course, that is a good moral position to have, to tell the truth. But a lot of PR pros, not because they're unethical or anything like that. There's pressure, and and they're not paying attention, and they're pulling stuff out, and they're lying. I got a pitch that said, "Dear C, I read your blog on." I said, "No, you didn't." I didn't. I'm talking to them in my head, because if you'd read my blog, you'd know my name is not C, like in C's Candies. It's like S-E-E.
Interesting.
Very interesting. I think it was probably
just
like.
Call you that.
Yeah. So I think
your new
just do your
nickname.
homework and don't lie.
Okay, that's good advice.
I would say skill diversification and continued education. I've spent, I can't even say how many years teaching myself how new techniques, new tactics, becoming knowledgeable about SEO and how that fits into more of a traditional PR world, content marketing. You can't just go into the PR world and think, I'm a great writer and I like to pitch journalists, and that's what's going to sustain me for the next 25 years. You really have to be fluent in what's happening on the digital side and from the technology standpoint, and you have to keep at it because it's changing at such a rapid pace that if you're not constantly staying in the know, then you're going to get left behind.
Let's stay on the skills track, because that's really important what you said. So for younger professionals or any professionals, what do you think are the most important skills and competencies, aside from the writing, which you've all said, you wanted to come into PR?
Mm-hmm. I don't know if you can teach this. I've heard arguments for both sides, but I think critical thinking, I think the pressure that PR people face, at least I know when I had my own agency, when I had Talk Tech, was people come to you and it's like everything's a fire drill. We have a product launch tomorrow. Well, why didn't you come to me 3 months ago? Why all of a sudden is this a fire drill? So then in order to keep your job, in order to get clients, you're moving at such a rapid pace that sometimes to step back and to say, is this really what we want to do? What are the goals? What am I trying to get out of it? So I think the skill set of critical thinking, which you can apply that, there's frameworks for that, but instead of this continuous pressure, we have to do things quickly and we have to get it out, and quantity, step back and say, okay, what are the goals and how do I critically think about this? So that's something I don't see, and I get pitched too, because I also write for various publications, and I get 10 pitches a day, 99% of which are irrelevant, because people haven't actually thought about what it is they're saying. So I think it's not a hard skill, which is weird coming from someone that's on the data side of it, but critical thinking and also discernment. So if you really understand who you're pitching or what story you're trying to tell, how does it fit into the larger macroeconomic landscape? How is it a trend? How do you hook into something that's already working? So those two probably not really that helpful in terms of what can I go do, what can I learn right now, but those soft skills are super important still, and even more so now with all the noise.
But that's a part of strategy. So rather than the tactical, what can we do, stepping back for strategy and critical thinking is tremendously important.
Yeah, I would agree with that violently.
Yeah. I say you really feel. Sit over here. Scoot over. Watch out for Shonali.
And just violent affection, violent love. And I see this a lot because I teach a lot, like you, Deirdre, and like I think all of us are teachers in some way. But I teach at Johns Hopkins, and I have my own online program, which is a master course in social PR. And what I see consistently is very smart people, not necessarily at a junior stage of their career, but many of the folks I teach and work with have been doing this for 15, 20 plus years. And they understand how to tell stories traditionally, but then they get really scared by the tech side of things. And they think that this whole digital space there's too much technology. Well, of course technology could drive us crazy, but we're not mechanical engineers and we're not software engineers, and we don't need to be. And all we need to do is understand how to use the tools that we have at our disposal for our work. That's all. So if we just understand how to use those tools to do our jobs better, that is what's going to help us grow. And so that's what I try to get my students to understand as well. And that means, again, stepping back, and instead of just saying, oh, let's send out a series of tweets here, why? Why are you doing this? That's the most important question you can ask. Because if you understand that, and it's not an easy question to answer, but if you keep thinking about it and you get to the point of understanding why you're doing something, you will understand how it's affecting your customers and your prospects and ultimately your brand. And if you are truthful, and this is kind of in the don't lie area, but if you are truly trying to find the best possible way for those groups to build a relationship, then you will understand why what you're doing is so important. Once you do that, the strategy just falls in place.
I think one commitment everyone can make, and I certainly fail at this all the time, but it's as a young PR professional, when you're still kind of growing up in your career and trying to figure out which track am I going to do, but once a year, commit yourself to learning some new technology or some new something. Mm-hmm. So whether it's getting Google Analytics certified or Marketo certified or something that has to do with the technology side of it, I think that's a really important, like a really easy place to start, just setting a goal that every year I'm going to learn something new, and I'm going to go to a conference, or I'm going to find a mentor, or I'm going to get certified in something that creates more value for you as a professional. And if we're talking about jobs, on the market, in the marketplace of PR professionals, sets you apart from the 100 other people that all they know how to do is write a press release. I mean,
and that's getting out of your comfort zone.
Right.
Completely.
Absolutely.
Did you want to add?
Yeah, I would add too that in addition to some of the tech and data and technology that we're talking about, I think it's really important for up-and-coming PR professionals to think about the psychology of people and client relations. You can be really good at what you do, but if you can't explain that succinctly so that your client can understand and really gravitate towards that process, then you are going to have a ton of roadblocks and hurdles. And I think understanding how to educate your client as well, and being aware of the best practices when approaching people or presenting a new idea, or how you are reporting back to them, is really essential. And I think sometimes you can get your blinders on and say, okay, this is what I'm doing, and here's your report, and you're supposed to understand all of it. And then you start to face some roadblocks just more in the human-to-human interaction. And I think that's something that the next generation should absolutely focus on.
Well, and that's the number one challenge of PR professionals. Mm-hmm. You're not only communicating internally to your teams, mm-hmm. you're communicating to the general public or whomever your constituency is, mm-hmm. and then the CEO or the person you're reporting to. It's this insane kind of mishmash of skills, because you have to take whatever you're translating out to here, reporting it back, and then figuring out, how am I going to get the CEO or the CMO to read the report and not throw it in the trash, which is what most of them do, because it's just 40 pages of nonsense that they can't read, or they don't understand, okay, what does this mean for the business? So and that takes time to learn. But if you're thinking about it, okay, I'm a communicator, so I have to learn how to communicate here. I have to learn how to communicate here, and I'm standing in the middle. And that's just something I think you're not taught. I mean, you have to learn that the hard way, usually.
Yeah. And that speaks to knowing any audience that you're going to get in front of. And when it comes to a CEO or any C-level, it's speaking their language, or you're right.
They want to know, how does this affect the bottom line? How is what I'm spending impacting the business? That's all they care about.
Financial buckets. Yeah. I agree.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's pivot a little bit and talk about spotting the trends. So all of you ladies are out there, you're working hard. What are you seeing that we really should keep our eyes on?
Just in general? Like fashion? Can we talk about fashion?
We're in New York.
No, I really don't.
Or PR.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's similar to what we were just talking about. I do think there's this trend there's a convergence happening. So the trend is you talk to marketing, you talk to advertising. It's that peso model, paid, earned, shared, and owned. It's finally starting to have some, I think, have some weight because of the technology that has enabled that. But yeah, I think PR people are no longer just writing press releases. They're storytellers. If they're good, which you all are very skilled at your jobs, so you know how to influence and get people in the room. But this idea of a PR professional as influencer is, I think, something the good ones are going to rise to the top, and they'll have massive influence over the actual business. Because if you have the data behind you to look at, you could say, hey, this is what's working and what's not, and you will start to see PR just aligned with marketing in the kind of, instead of bucketing it, they'll all kind of be together. I would hope that's what starts happening. But I think that's the trend we're starting to see more and more, is the PR as an influencer to the business.
I think that is definitely something that is happening more and more. I do see more convergence as well. But what troubles me is that I still see a lot of people relying on outdated metrics and outdated ways of measurement. And it scares me because a lot of it now is coming in because of push from marketing. Because marketing doesn't really understand how PR works, but marketing is tasked with bringing the money in. And so they want to measure in terms of money, which I agree with. But I don't agree with. We all know what I'm talking about here. I'm not sure if I'm ready to, is it okay to kind of open Pandora's box yet? But it scares me when, thanks to technology, we have wonderful new platforms and things coming up, and I'm sure you get sent a lot of these to test, and I do as well. And there's one, particularly in the influencer space, that is total rubbish because it's basically AVE dressed up. And yet it's being sold as this new technology thing that's going to help you measure your influencer efforts better. But it doesn't. It's just the same old crap in a new box. But it's coming from a place of it's coming from a place of the future, and so people are getting drawn to it, and that really scares me. So I think we really need to, as an industry, not get blindsided by the shiny stuff and really get back to why are we doing this? What are the business results that we need to generate? Forget about, and just focus on that. And how can we show our work helps to do that?
The problem that and sorry, real quick to jump in on that point, the problem that we set out to tackle 5 years ago that AirPR is tackling is PR attribution. So that's the difference, is that there hasn't been the attribution. So in a normal setting, PR person sees 5% of the attribution because you have to have a direct link. So what we did is we created a technology where you don't have to have the link. You can and you can still get the attribution, so it gets you closer to 95%. That's what's been keeping us out of conversations with marketing. And then PR comes in because they haven't had the innovation, and then they're making up all these random numbers. It's like, no, 7 billion people did not see your press release, and they didn't do anything. So I think I guess the trend would be PR attribution as a mandatory mechanism for marketing, so that you can start to see what PR is actually doing versus what marketing's actually doing versus what paid is actually doing. So will start to be technology enhancements in the PR industry that will drive that convergence. Because without the attribution, you can't you can't actually do it.
Yeah.
I think I just said actually about 10 times. What I actually meant was
What did you actually
PR
mean?
attribution is really important. Yeah.
I think we're talking about a lot of education.
Yes.
I think there's work to be done.
Yep.
And I would just add, I think as far as a trend, I see integration, much like you're all speaking of. So going above and beyond the traditional skill set, integrating with the marketing teams. And I find sometimes that the PR side has more of that tactical, data-driven approach to begin with. So you really can augment a lot of marketing programs in ways that I don't feel necessarily are always realized. So I think really understanding our role as tacticians and owning that space and being able to drive strategy.
Excellent.
What about the, sorry, because I think this is a problem that I see a lot. What about the PR firm that's in the middle of the country in Ohio that's representing, a local, I don't know, pet store? I feel like that's the conversation also that's important to have, because obviously if you're in an environment where technology drives everything, which we all are, we're in New York and DC and San Francisco and all these other places, but that's 10% of PR practitioners. So, and I'm almost asking it as a question because I'm no longer a practitioner, but what are we telling them? I mean, their budgets are minuscule, but they still need to practice PR in the same way. So what are they to be doing, and what are the trends for them?
But look at the technology. So we're sitting here, Facebook Live. It's a lot easier when you think about it, that small business that's in the Midwest, the fact that you just have your mobile phone, that you can tell your story and do it really transparently. I think that technology also helps a business to share and share openly if they know how to take advantage of it.
And I think if they can step back from fear,
Yeah.
of the fear of the unknown, and I don't know how to do this Facebook Live thing, or I don't know whatever, and because that's very, very valid. You do have in most of the country, most of the world, for example, we are anomalies. We're not the norm. I wish we were the norm, but we're kind of the
we are.
we're the freaks and geeks. But that's a very, very valid concern. And I have some of my students, for example, in my master's course, who are living in small towns in Texas, and Texas has got some great big towns too, or small towns in Ohio, Kentucky, etc., and Kansas. And it's the same question. Well, over here, the local paper is really important, or the local weekly is really important. I said, then use them, for sure. But that doesn't mean you can't still put in place the mechanisms to track and to make those correlations and to get that attribution and connection.
Well, and what an opportunity to take leadership if you're in those smaller markets and you're doing it. But I think that's something I'm always really weary of, is having these big conversations about, technology and the trends, and it's all great. But when it comes down to the nuts and bolts of who's really using those things and how it's actually working in the real world, I mean, I don't know, I just think it gets tricky. And so I think social media is great. And
I would say social media and owned content. I mean, people can, the accessibility to technology is also something to consider for people in small markets. I mean, people can easily set up their own website if they so choose. They can easily, have a blog component on their website. They can easily start to develop some of their own content. Are they going to be well versed in everything from long tail keywords to what their domain authority is? Probably not, but they can start to really share their story and own their space in their market through some of these very accessible technology channels.
If you look at all of us, and yes, we've spent years, decades, in some instances.
Not too many decades.
Doing this, and we've all, at what point did we ever feel, we know it all? There's still so much I don't know, and it's so much of it is so scary, but you just have to face it, and you just have to, like Rebekah said, you just put one foot in front of the other, and you keep moving forward. So if you just take one thing, it's like when Rebekah was saying, once a year do something to improve your professional knowledge and your skill set. Well, I go further than that. Once a week, do something that takes you out of your comfort zone.
You're way more of a overachiever than I am. Just once a year, just do it.
No, seriously.
Every day.
Making me look bad.
Every day, just do it.
Go for a walk in the different direction than you normally go. Take it out of the PR world. Take it out. Just because I'm not to get all like woo-woo and stuff, but like who we are is what we bring to the table in our work. And so if we start experimenting and be more courageous in our lives, we're going to do that in our work.
There's an interesting book that a friend of mine just came out with called The Fuzzy and the Techie. And the concept behind it is that we still need liberal arts. Even as everything is moving into STEM and technology, we still need those soft skills and people that can communicate and understand really the world on a larger scale. And I think that what you're getting at, and I certainly have this fear too, is that am I going to be obsolete because I'm a writer and a storyteller and a communicator and we live in a world of technology? And I think it's actually the opposite, which is that, we need both of those things. And so you have to not be fearful also of all of the technology conversations, because it doesn't mean that what you're doing isn't important. It just means you have to be aware of the other side. So I think, you can always be a better writer, and as writers and communicators, we can always become better at that. But then alongside that, spend 30% of your time, getting a skill set or acquiring a skill set in another area. But yeah, I just think it's a really interesting exploration of this kind of backlash that's happening. Because some people, I don't want to be coding. I'm sorry, that's not something that's interesting to me.
I didn't go to school. I'm not a math person. That's why I went to journalism school.
Yeah.
Oh, God, I'm so tired of hearing that.
Yeah, we all have
you're in your own house, right?
Yes,
So
yes.
Clearly,
exactly.
you can do some kind of math.
Yeah.
Science meets art, basically.
Exactly, it's art and science. We talk about that.
So, okay, with all the skills and the trends and everything that's going on, how are you staying ahead? Because clearly you just mentioned we don't want to be obsolete, but you don't want to code. But there's ways to stay ahead of the curve so that we can inform our own businesses or clients. What are you doing?
I think a lot of it is just having conversations with people that I think know what's going on. So building a community of colleagues and peers and educators that can see where things are going, and to make sure that I'm understanding, because again, I'm on the building technology side, and our customers are consuming the platform. And so it's less about how are PR practitioners practicing, it's how are they reporting and what matters in terms of that. And so I think it's also it's a lot of listening and reading about everything that's going on. There's so much happening now. There's so many things going on in the world. And I think we do have to be aware of those things on some level so that we sound smart when we're talking about, how do you push a product out? How do you oh my gosh, now you have to be so sensitive. You have to be sensitive to everything. So that's, being aware of generally what's going on, and then talking to, finding 10 people that you really trust, your panel of peers that you go to and say, what's the trend you're seeing this year or this quarter or something, and just keeping those people close, because there's just far too much going on to ever feel like you're going to have arrived. Yeah. So it's more about, finding people you trust and then consuming, I think, intelligently crafted information and finding, I read reports in Economist and Wall Street Journal and TechCrunch, and then some PR blogs. I obviously read, your blog, and I'm sure I'll read your blog too, but, Jeannie Dietrich and people in the industry that really have a good sense of what's going on. I think that's one way.
I think that's the only way, actually, because, to add to that, though, I would say also read people who you're not yet totally convinced by. But, if they sound intelligent, listen and absorb and see, because, I think Mark Schaefer is really on the ball and he is very, very forward-thinking. He's also a very good friend of mine. But I would read his stuff even if he wasn't, and even if I disagreed with some of the posts that appear on his blog, because he gets really smart people in the room. And I think how we stay grounded is by not letting opinion only guide us, because we have to understand the facts as well, and take all the time it takes. Take all the time you need to understand the facts, absorb them, and ask questions. If you don't understand something, ask it. That's one thing I've learned. I used to be, as a child, really, really insecure and shy and so scared of asking questions because it might be the wrong question. and somebody would laugh at me. And I've learned, fortunately I learned, before I was in my grave, that not asking those questions is a stupid thing to do. And there is literally no such thing as a stupid question. No, there are stupid questions, but it is not stupid to ask a question if you don't understand what's going on.
I agree. I have to agree with the reading. I mean, I'm constantly reading, digesting, seeking out new information. I try to look for it sometimes outside of our field because I find that's where you can really find a new, fresh perspective and then take it and apply it to your work, especially when you're leading a team. I read a lot about leadership, mentorship, also hearing the stories of other successful leaders, no matter what industry that they're in. That really helps me to stay grounded and focused. So when we do get a challenge or a crisis, or that client who comes in and says, I want to launch a product in next week, what can you do for me? You have that foundation, that really strong mental foundation where you're like, well, this isn't possible, and this is how I need to navigate this situation, maintain relationships, and also guide my team.
I think to get really concrete about it, you have to have a good sense of the industry and where it's going and what the tools are, and how to become part of that. And then the second is whatever industry you're representing. So if you're in fashion, you know a lot about that. And then the third, I think, that people don't talk about is economics. I think that most PR people should really know on a pretty, I would say, macro scale what's going on with the economy, because that a lot of times drives, it enables you to look at data sets from, and that's what journalists love. If you're talking about just a straight story, that you're an editorial story, I think understanding what's going on in the economy, what's happening with jobs, what's happening with just housing. I mean, it sounds kind of weird, but I think that it gives us a pretty good general understanding and sense of things. But people don't really talk about that. But I know the best PR people I know are almost economists.
You're worldly in a sense. My first mentor pretty much said, well, first he said you have to be reading the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times because you have to know what's going on in terms of regulatory, if it affects your clients, or the economy, or technology, whatever regulations are. So kind of getting outside of your shell is really important. Okay, ladies, I do want to mention one thing, that you're all here for the Women in PR USA launch today, which is really exciting. I'm here for it too. And maybe you could just, because you're here in the spirit of women, just say what you're looking forward to as a woman in PR.
You want to start? I feel like I'm starting and hogging.
Sure, I can start. I'm looking forward to more women leaders. I'm noticing a trend. We have M Studio is a small boutique agency, so I'm noticing a lot more young female leaders kind of staking their place in our industry and going after it. So I'm looking forward to seeing more of that, for sure.
And real quick, Shonali and Rebekah?
I also want to see more women saying it is not okay to have a panel of men at a major PR conference talking about what women need to do to become leaders in PR.
Yeah,
good one.
Yeah, I mean, it's similar. I think that we have to embrace each other in a way, and women and men have to embrace each other in a way that respects each skill set, and so we can all be at the table together. I think that's an important conversation.
Okay, and real quick, where can people find you?
AirPR.com.
Okay.
ShonaliBurke.com.
mdidit.com.
Excellent. Ladies, thank you so much for a dynamic conversation, and thank you to all of you for tuning in to the Nasdaq PR Influencer Series. I'm Deirdre Breakenridge signing off for now, but stay tuned for more from Nasdaq.